have an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. And before we bring on our guest, let me give you a few pieces of UFO news today. When I Googled UFO news in California, sure enough, there happened to be a sighting in Redondo Beach with the name Robert Bingham. I don't know if you've ever heard of him out there, anybody listening, but he is a self-proclaimed CE5 Dr. Greer contactee, but he took his own method. Anyway, that's one of the big news. Another one is a weird UFO caught on video in Virginia Beach. Everybody out there who's submitting me these news, keep on doing it. I love to hear them. And if you'd like me to read a message that you've written to me, be sure and say so. All you have to do is just go onto the website, hit the contact, and essentially the same way you've been providing me with the news. Now, a small change today. We were originally going to do an hour and a half of Dr. Susan Shumsky and the last half hour with Michael Tellinger. Sadly, he couldn't make it today as the last minute, and you will hear him in 2 weeks. That is for sure. But that's okay. And the reason why I say it's okay is because what Dr. Shumsky is going to be talking about is far more important. It's actually along the lines of what you've already been hearing from people such as William Henry, Foster Gamble. Both of those people were able to essentially become visionaries by meditating and unlocking their brains or antennas, spiritual antennas. Some people call it third eye. There's different names for it, but it all does the same thing, and it could provide you with anything. You can manifest essentially anything. And with that being said, I'd like to bring on our guest who's been doing this for almost 50 years, going in the 5th decade, on her 11th book, Awaken Your Third Eye, and that is Dr. Suzanne Shumsky. Dr. Shumsky, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you today, John.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I thought this was very fitting because, like I said, William Henry talked about what we really need to do is be able to unlock our third eye, and that is the main thing that's missing to keep us from manifesting everything. And then Foster Gamble, the heir to Procter & Gamble and the founder of the Thrive Movement, had the same thing where he was meditating, asking the universe how it works, and essentially he was given that answer. And I thought that would fit perfectly in line. And then, speaking of synchronicity, after I ran into a few weeks ago, your book arrived in the mail, Awaken Your Third Eye. And I thought that was fascinating because that just goes totally in line with what we're saying. But for those out there who are not quite hearing this, are not quite hearing what happened in between the shows or have missed the shows about third eye or about answers from the universe or manifestations, I might as well ask you, let's just explain to everybody, what is the third eye and where is it located?
Well, the third eye is part of our human energy system. And the energy system that I'm talking about is not visible to your physical eyes. And if you dissected a corpse, you would not find that energy system anywhere. So the third eye is part of what they call the chakra and nadi system, or in Chinese medicine, they would call it the meridians and the acupuncture points. So what we're talking about is subtle energy. So we begin with the whole idea of prana. Prana is life force energy. It's called chi in China, and it's called ki in Japan. And it is said in the ancient scriptures of India that when prana is in the body, that is defined as life. And when prana leaves the body, that is what is defined as death. So prana is what is keeping you alive. If you just had a body, a physical body with no prana in it, you would be a zombie, or you would be a corpse, actually. There would be no heat in your body. There would be no motion. So this life force energy that's called prana is keeping you alive, maintaining your life, maintaining you being alive and moving and breathing and all of that. So this life force energy actually runs through conduits of energy in your subtle body, in what we call the energy body, also known as the pranamaya kosha. That's the Sanskrit name for it. So the subtle energy is running through these conduits that are called nadi, N-A-D-I. And in China, they call them meridians, actually. And that life force energy running through that is maintaining, regulating your entire physical system, keeping you alive and keeping you in motion. So when many of these conduits of subtle energy intersect in a plexus, we call that a chakra. And chakra in Sanskrit simply means wheel. Well, one of these plexuses of subtle energy is called the Agya chakra, which is the sixth chakra or third eye chakra. There are 7 major chakras in your subtle energy system, and there are 7 minor as well that I talk about in my book, The Power of Chakras. But in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, in this latest book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I only speak about one of these chakras, which is called the Agya chakra. That's A-J-N-A. It's also known as the third eye. It's known as your second sight. Your sixth sense is there. It's known as the brow chakra as well. And it is located in your head. It's located specifically in the pineal gland, and also there are parts of it that are in your forehead and in the back of your head as well. So it encompasses various parts of your head, but mainly it is focused in the pineal gland. And what it's doing, the word Agya chakra means command center. That's actually literally what it translates as. And in fact, that pineal gland and the glands around it are what are commanding or directing your entire endocrine system, which really regulates your whole physical maintenance. So these chakras they're very, very important, even though you can't see them, even though you can't touch them, even though they're not in the physical plane, and they are in the spiritual plane. They are what is keeping you alive. So they're very, very important.
I have 2 questions. One, I'm going to go back to something you said in the beginning, prana. I definitely heard that associated with life. I believe that was when we did the last interview on the power of chakras. I've also heard it referenced with breath. Am I mistaken where prana can actually mean breath, since breath is life?
Yes, that's very good that you mentioned that, because prana, there is a exercise done in India called pranayama, which is a breathing exercise that helps to create more pranic energy flowing through your subtle body. Prana is in the breath, it's in thought, it's in sunlight, it's in food, and it's in water. Those are the places where you find prana. So all of those things, when imbibed, increase pranic energy. And pranic energy in your energy field is what gives you greater charisma. It gives you greater success, well-being, health, robust health and energy. It helps you to be more vibrant, more magnetically attractive. All good things come with the increase of prana in your energy field. So it's really amazing. Prana is the key to so much good that comes into your life. That's why it's important to increase pranic energy in your field.
When you mentioned the pineal gland, a lot of people refer to it as our spiritual antenna, and as you mentioned, the seventh chakra, and that's. Can you explain that and how it's associated with the third eye?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, it's the 6th chakra, the Agya chakra. The 7th chakra is the one at the crown of your head. So the 6th chakra, called Agya chakra, is associated with intuition, knowledge, higher learning, the planet Jupiter, which is the preceptor, that's a fancy name for teacher, of the gods. It's associated with all kinds of higher learning and inspiration, intuition, ESP, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. All of these things can be developed through awakening the third eye. But even more, it's also associated with physical immortality, amazingly, because the third eye is where you manufacture something called soma, the nectar of immortality, which is pretty powerful, which is something that we'll get into later, I think, in this interview. So it's really so vital to life, but it's also vital to spiritual awakening. That's why the third eye is so important and so powerful.
And it seems to me a lot of people have finally realized that consciousness is the missing key, and a lot more people are meditating. And the concept of the third eye and the pineal gland, I think, have skyrocketed in the last decade, more so than the 30, 40 years combined prior to, I guess, at least in the Western world. And I've noticed a lot of symbolism associated with the third eye. For instance, in the Vatican, there's a big pine cone in their center square, and it's just scattered all around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about the symbolism in the third eye, and maybe even some of the greater, older, ancient architectural structures that contain hints of a pine?
Right. Well, the reason why it's called a pineal gland is because it looks a little bit like the seed of a pine cone. It really resembles a pine cone if you look at the pineal gland, and that is actually where the third eye is located, even though it's not in your physical body. I have to reiterate that it is not a physical thing. But the pine cone is well known as a very spiritual symbol known throughout the world. For example, in Angkor Wat in Cambodia, there's a huge Buddhist temple, and in that temple you're seeing these giant pine cone structures. If you look at Lord Buddha, you often see above his head a 1,000-petal lotus that sort of looks like a pine cone as well. If you look at the thyrsus, which is a staff from ancient Greece, wielded by the fertility god Dionysus, who's also known as Bacchus, and his followers, they're holding stalk of giant fennel plant that's twined with ivy and with vine branches, and it often has a ribbon around it, and it's topped with a pine cone. But the biggest pine cone statue in the world is the pine cone fountain at the Vatican in Rome. And also the Pope has a staff with a pine cone on it. So it's definitely been depicted throughout the world and throughout the ages as a very spiritual symbol, the pine cone.
So they absolutely knew the powers of the pineal gland then. And that's what leads me to my next question. Obviously, if the Vatican, like you mentioned, that's one thing that slipped my mind prior to asking the question. I knew of the giant pine in their garden, but I forgot that the Pope does indeed carry a staff that has a pine on it. So clearly, following Jesus' death and the New Testament, there are references to it. But do you know of any references in the Bible, in the Old Testament, or other references in the New Testament regarding the third eye?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact. There was a little incident with Jacob where he was wrestling with an angel, and what happened is he says he wrestled with God face to face, and he named that place where he had the encounter with God, he named it Peniel, which translates, by the way, as face of God. And that is appropriate because the mystics might see the face of God with their third eye. So that's one case where it was talked about in the Bible, is in this particular incident with Jacob. And then the other place is where Jesus says, if your eye is single, then your entire body will be filled with light. He was speaking not only of the third eye, but also of single intention, of single purpose. So, and that makes sense because the pineal gland and the third eye is also the seat of intention, of purpose, of discernment, of discrimination, of making decisions, because it's the seat of the intellect as well as the seat of intuition.
When do you think they first realized the power of the third eye, because obviously you go back 150 years ago, modern medicine, a good surgeon consisted of someone who could amputate something as quickly as possible. They didn't have any idea of bacteria or anything like that. Going back hundreds of years before that, I heard it was illegal. Some people, I think Leonardo da Vinci, were so fascinated by human anatomy, they would go grave robbing just so they can get a body to study. And so going back 1,000, 2,000 years to be able to isolate that small portion in your brain seems to me that it'd be sort of hard to do unless they were guided by some divine force or unless they were given that wisdom by something not originating from here on Earth. Do you think that's the case? Were we us humans given the wisdom by, say, extraterrestrials or extra-dimensional beings, or were we just sort of those people who understood it tapped into the universal consciousness?
Well, that's a great question, John. And I believe that we have all the wisdom of the universe within us. And in fact, where's it located? It's located in our third eye. That's in fact the very place where the storehouse of divine wisdom is held within the subtle body. And as far as Western medicine or Western allopathic, they really are clueless about so many things. They're clueless completely about the subtle body. If you talk to an average surgeon or an average doctor today, they would give no credence to the subtle body or to the chakras, to subtle anatomy whatsoever. However, in ancient India and ancient China, this was well known. It's been well known for a very long time. And Plato obviously knew about, for example, Plato is from the West, but he obviously knew about Eastern wisdom because he believed in the chakras and he talked about them in his books. He talked about the third eye, which was called encephalos. He says that it is, quote, the eye of wisdom, and he viewed the chakras as subtle organs through which the soul or psyche communicates with the physical body. And he believed in this third eye, and he believed in pranic energy, but he called it something else. He called it radical moisture. So, he was well versed in Eastern philosophy and Eastern wisdom, obviously, or he wouldn't have known about it. That is well known by the ancients as to what this command center or the pineal gland or the subtle energy center that's associated with it, what that really was.
I see, especially now, on a dollar bill, we have the pyramid, and there's, of course, the tip of it with an eye illuminated above it. And then, of course, it's all over the world, the all-seeing eye. And I also noticed in the book we talk about the eye of providence. And I was wondering if you could talk about the two, and are there any differences, similarities, or is the all-seeing eye that the Freemasons, for example, use something totally different than what we're discussing?
Well, the Freemasons claim that their all-seeing eye, which is sacred to their order, is completely different from the eye of providence. On July 4th of 1776, as soon as the Declaration of Independence was signed, immediately they began to design the Great Seal of the new Union, shall we say. So I hate to use the word United States because it's actually a corporation, but the union, the actual union of the 13 colonies, they were designing a Great Seal. So this Great Seal had nothing to do with Masonry, by the way. There was no one who was on the design committee who was a Mason. However, this all-seeing eye is something that is well known. Even in Renaissance art, there was an all-seeing eye, and the people who created the Great Seal did put this, what they call the Eye of Providence, on the Great Seal above the pyramid, or as the capstone of the pyramid is more like it. They put the eye in the capstone. But that's not in any Masonic imagery at all. It's not in the Masonic tracing boards or anything like that. However, it was taken from Renaissance art, and then and the reason why they called it the Eye of Providence is because George Washington and other founding fathers believed that Providence had intervened many times on the behalf of the new country that was being formed. And George Washington stated, for example, this is a quote from him, "The many remarkable interpositions of the divine government in the hours of our deepest distress and darkness have been too luminous to suffer me to doubt the happy issue of the present contest." So he believed in providence. He believed in divine intervention. He was a very spiritual man. And by the way, he was a Mason, and he was a very spiritual man.
So do you think he was in touch? Obviously, because he was a Mason, and I've seen paintings of him with Masonic garb
Right.
as he's president.
Right.
And obviously, the Masons go back hundreds of years before that, and some people even link them to the Knights Templar or some sort of secret society that's carried this knowledge for thousands of years. Do you think that the knowledge that they're carrying is essentially what you're talking about right now?
Well, yes, I do, but Washington didn't have a hand in designing the seal.
Oh, yeah.
But he was a Mason,
Yes.
and the Masonic all-seeing eye of God has a different context from the Eye of Providence. The Eye of Providence represents God's active intervention in human affairs, but the Masons will insist that the Masonic all-seeing eye is a different symbol, but it symbolizes God's passive watchfulness and ever-present care for the universe. And the Masonic all-seeing eye is an official symbol for God, and they call that the great architect of the universe. And you see that in the Masonic tracing boards as a G for the great architect, or you see it as an I for the all-seeing eye of God that is watching passively. So the main difference between the Eye of Providence and the all-seeing eye is that the Eye of Providence is an actual active divine intervention in human affairs, and the all-seeing eye is passively taking care of,
The rest of the world.
humanity. Yeah.
Yes. The dog star. Can you tell us, is it related to the third eye? Susan? I think you're cutting out a little bit. We can't hear you.
You can hear me. Okay,
There we
good.
go. Yeah.
All right, the dog star is Sirius. That's spelled Sirius. It's not. It's not the word Sirius. So it is a star called Sirius, and it is the brightest star in the sky. It's 20 times brighter than our sun, actually. And according to esoteric wisdom, it is thought to be the sun behind the sun. In other words, is the true source of our sun's potency. And in the Masonic Lodge, the dog star is the most important symbol. You'll find it always in each lodge. Often it's in the embedded in the floor as part of the tiles, or you'll see it in the center piece of a Masonic tracing boards. It is the blazing star of Masonry, and it is described as, quote, the first and most exalted object that demands our attention in the lodge. And it is also a symbol of the omniscient creator, and it's a symbol of the third eye as well. It's associated with the pineal gland. And the other thing is that it's the true light shining in the east. It's the spiritual light.
We clearly know that ancient Egypt had a grasp on astronomy because they built the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, to align with the Sirius star system. And some people say the same thing happened with the Sumerians. Do you think that's the case? Were they also well aware of the Dog Star and Sirius before the Egyptians had a grasp on it?
Well, I do believe that the Egyptians were very spiritual, obviously. They had these, very interesting, in the pyramid, they have these shafts that go, they're too small for anybody, they're really small. I mean, these tiny shafts that are going all the way from the inner chambers all the way out. And you wonder, what are those shafts for? Are they for the soul, some soul to leave? Are they for spiritual energy to either go in or out? I mean, what is it? And the pyramids are just so mystical. Even if you go and visit and stand inside a pyramid, it's just a mystical experience to even be there. For example, in the king's chamber or the queen's chamber, it's obviously a very spiritual culture, and they based everything upon their gods and their goddesses and all the wisdom that comes from Egypt is really fascinating. So yeah, they believed in what they call the Eye of Horus, which is another symbol for the third eye. All these things we're talking about now, the ancient lore, for example, the all-seeing eye, the Thyrsus, all these things, they're all symbols for the third eye. And the Eye of Horus is one of these things. So there was a god, his name was Horus. He was the son of Osiris. And Horus is the sky god. And there was a fight that happened when Osiris died. There was a fight between Horus, who was his son, and Horus's uncle, the brother of Osiris, named Seth. So they fought over the throne, and in the battle, Seth gouged out the left eye of Horus, and Seth lost his testicles. Ooh. And it said in that myth, it said that Seth either tossed the eye into the celestial ocean or he tore it to pieces, depending on which version you read of the story. So then, after that happened, then Thoth, who's the god of magic and wisdom, he magically restored the eye to its full moon state. So I'll come back to that in a minute when I say the full moon state. And then Horus then gave that eye, which had been restored, he gave it to his father Osiris in an attempt to resurrect him. And then Osiris ate the eye, and then he was magically restored. He magically came back to life, and then he was allowed to rule the underworld. So the Eye of Horus, also known as the Wadjet or Udjat, that word Udjat, it means intact and complete and whole and healthy. And it also symbolizes the phases of the moon, because the eye in the sky, which is the moon, is torn out each month, so to speak, torn out. So that eye symbolizes the moon. It symbolizes wholeness and health and well-being. And it is the Eye of Horus, also known as the Wadjet or Udjat. And by the way, it also is the goddess Sekhmet. Her name is Wadjet as well. So.
Interesting. Another thing, now I love that fact that we're talking about these ancient cultures that seem to have far more wisdom than the several centuries, if not millennia, that follow them. After the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians, it seemed to me that we sort of dipped down in the wisdom that we originally had, and finally it's starting to pop up. But going back to ancient societies, Cyclops, it's a very famous being in Greece that had one giant eye. Does that relate to the third eye, or?
Well, actually, I do believe it does. I believe that Cyclops is a symbol of the third eye. I do believe that because that's where his eye is. It's in the middle of his forehead. And that's a pretty interesting tale. It's a tale of Homer, who was traveling around the world, and he ended up on this place called Cyclops. And he was met by this big giant Polyphemus, or I think his name is Polyphemus, and he barely escaped with his life, along with some of his men survived as well, although some of them were eaten by this horrible monster giant. And I believe that this was a symbol of the third eye, and what can happen when you're not careful about using your spiritual powers that are seated in your third eye, how that can cause you to fall, which is what happened to this giant.
A lot of people talk about the fact that there's this global conspiracy to dumb us down, to keep us from reaching our full potential, to maybe depopulate the earth to a more controllable level. Do you think the fact that you're sharing this wisdom, as are others, and yet the mainstream science has yet, or mainstream in general, has yet to accept what we're talking about as fact, even though clearly we have history of it being fact and it existing? Do you think they're purposely trying to keep us from learning the truth to access our true potential?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think they're even smart enough to do that. I don't think they think that. I think that their vibration is so low and their consciousness is so low that they wouldn't even be able to devise such a plan, if you want to know the truth. I think that they're just thinking with, shall we say, the lower chakras. They're thinking with the chakras that are involved with survival, that are involved with grabbing and gaining and maintaining power, and with domination, world domination, and that kind of thing. And I mean, you could say that fluoridation of the water, for example, is a conspiracy. You could say it's a conspiracy or not. The fact is that the pineal gland, if you drink water with fluoride in it your whole life, and if you use fluoride in such products as toothpaste and so on, what you're doing is you're poisoning your pineal gland. The pineal gland gets calcified as we get older. This is a known fact. These are scientific facts I'm telling you. And what happens is, as it gets calcified, unfortunately, people's third eye, ESP powers of subtle perception, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience diminish. That's the reason why often children who have clean, clear pineal glands are more perceptive, as far as maybe they're speaking with their imaginary friend who's not so imaginary. They have greater powers of imagination when they're children. They have ESP. A lot of kids do, until their parents punish them for it. I mean, the reality is that there are things that are poisoning our body. If you want to call it conspiracy, you can. But that's the reality. We're getting poisoned by several different things that are acting adversely towards our pineal gland, not only the fluoridation, but also even light at night pollution, what they call LAN, or light at night pollution, where we're staying up late and we're using artificial light. We're not using the sunlight in the daytime. We're not getting out in the sun enough, and we're not getting enough darkness at night. We need both in order for the melatonin production that comes from the pineal gland to work properly, and the serotonin production that also is happening in the pineal gland. In the daytime, it produces serotonin, and in the nighttime, it produces melatonin. And we need both of those for our bodies to work efficiently, and also for our pineal glands to work, and for our third eye chakra to work properly. So there are things that are polluting that are disempowering us. And of course, yes, there are powers that be that want to keep the masses enslaved. So dumbing down people is a great way to keep the masses enslaved. But people have a choice. You know, we all have choice as individuals. Do we want to dumb ourselves down by just staring at the boob tube all the time? Or do we want to develop ourselves spiritually, maybe do some spiritual practices, maybe read some spiritual books, maybe come to a spiritual class and receive awakening? I mean, actually experience higher states of consciousness, or at least get some wisdom about what's really going on, you know? So there's a lot that we can learn. And there's a lot of ways that we can reverse this trend of being dumbed down. We can take personal responsibility and not get ourselves dumbed down.
I wholeheartedly agree with you that when we are children, we are much more pure because we're not drinking the fluorinated water. We're not as vaccinated as we are by the time we hit our teens. We're not breathing the pollution or eating as much genetically modified organisms. So in that sense, I agree with you that the powers that be clearly don't want us to have that ability, because they want us to keep us as slaves. Now, I'm going to go back to something we talked about earlier, and for those listeners out there who didn't catch our interview last year on the book that you had last year, The Power of the Chakras, you mentioned that the crown chakra, if I'm not mistaken, is where our third eye is. Is that right?
Actually, our third eye is in our sixth chakra. It's called the third eye chakra, or the brow chakra.
Got it.
And that chakra is in the middle of our head. And the seventh chakra is above our head. That's called the crown chakra. So that's the seventh chakra.
So it was this. The sixth is the third eye, as you mentioned.
That's correct.
The brow. Okay. And
also, could I just go back for 1 second about the Polyphemus story?
Of course.
Yeah. So I was talking a little bit about that. And I just wanted to mention that we might consider some possible interpretations about the Cyclops myth. Because what Odysseus did, when he got the giant drunk and the giant fell asleep, and then Odysseus drove a firebrand into that eye that's in the center of the Cyclops' forehead, and it blinded him. So a couple of different explanations of this myth, we might say. One is that the piercing of the eye of the Cyclops, that represents the atrophy of the third eye, such as what happens with the fluoridation and so on, and a subsequent loss of divine wisdom. And then another possible explanation would be that if the spiritual gifts that are granted by opening the third eye are misused, then we can become vulnerable to destruction, as in Homer piercing that third eye with the firebrand. So it's a kind of a myth, you know, and I think it has some meaning to it.
I'm glad you said that it has some meaning to it, because I don't think that everything they talked about that we refer to as mythology now is actually just myths. Obviously, the ancient people of the time were seeing things and experiencing things that they had to describe in their own words. So for us now as a civilization to go back and say everything that they did from say 100 BC to 3000 BC is all myth and lore, I think is false. There has to be some credence to what they went through. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree. And I do believe that the ancient cultures of the Far East and the Middle East had a tremendous amount of wisdom, especially India and China. You're going to find a lot more wisdom about our subtle anatomy and about spiritual awakening and enlightenment in those ancient scriptures than you would find in, for example, 1600s, 1700s, around, our so-called modern civilization, and even up until the 20th century when we started learning about the wisdom of the East. Thank goodness for the great teachers who came over to America and helped us to begin to understand this ancient wisdom.
One of the people that you worked with was Maharishi, and I know you know the Maharishi effect, and a lot of people out there don't know about it, and I was wondering if you could describe that.
Oh, okay, great. So I studied with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He was the guru of the Beatles and the guru of Deepak Chopra. And I was in his ashrams. I lived in his ashrams for 22 years. I was on his personal staff for 7 of those 22 years. And I used to go into my room and meditate, and I used to spend anywhere from 5 to 20 hours a day in meditation. I used to fast for up to 2 months at a time. I used to go into my room and not appear for up to 8 weeks at a time. I would often observe silence. And one time I observed silence for 4 months straight without even uttering a sound. And so let's say I was an introvert. And that's definitely an understatement. So I spent all those years in the ashram. And so I studied with Maharishi, learned meditation. I learned meditation in 1967. I went to India to study with him in 1969. And then later in the 70s, I was still with him. And he said, he was talking about that. He was saying that when we want to have a green forest, for the forest to be green, that all the trees in the forest must be green. So he had this idea that in order to enlighten the world, and this was really his mission. His mission was to bring world peace. His mission was to bring as many people as possible to spiritual awakening so that the world could be at peace. And that's all he ever talked about, was bringing the world at peace and enlightening people, and meditation was the way to that. So his philosophy was that if you have more people meditating, then you're going to have a peaceful world. That was his theory. Well, actually, he proved his theory through scientific research. What he would do is he would send people to war-torn areas and have them meditate in groups. He would send people to high-crime areas, and they would meditate in groups. And he found that when a certain percentage of the population was practicing meditation and practicing meditation in groups, scientific research proved that crime went down, that war dissipated, and so forth. So this ended up being called the Maharishi effect, because what it was about a certain percentage of people in the population causing an effect on the entire population. It's like the 100th monkey effect, actually. It's similar idea. But this is in reference to populations of humans that produce effects when there are enough humans that are doing something positive for the world, such as meditating together, that this will have a positive effect on the entire group. And it's really, really powerful. And it's supported by people like Rupert Sheldrake, also had similar kinds of ideas, and other people who talked about these ideas that are pretty new, really relatively very new in our culture. And Maharishi really did a lot to bring Eastern philosophy and Eastern wisdom to us in the West. In fact, he single-handedly, in my opinion, single-handedly made meditation a household word in the 20th century. Before he was around, people thought the word meditation had to be a typo for medication or something, or they thought yogi was a typo for yogurt, or people didn't know anything. They really didn't, until he came around and started enlightening people of the West. And I was very happy and privileged to be around him for so long.
One of the experiments that I heard about was in Washington, D.C. for a period of 7 days. I don't know the exact number. It could be 1,000. It could be less or more. He had that many people meditating at the same time for peace, like you said. And during that week, I think the crime rate dropped to about half of what it normally was. And that was the famous example that I was given to me that really stuck out in my head. Were you around him? Were you aware of that particular experiment?
Yeah, I was there. I participated in it, yeah. I was one of those people that was meditating.
That is fascinating. You truly have rubbed shoulders with some of the most important intellectuals of this time, which is great because you are now passing down this knowledge to everybody else, and you have continued to do so for decades and will continue to do so, especially being on your 11th book. Now, last time we talked about your previous book, The Power of Chakras, and as we just discussed a few minutes ago in the beginning of the show, that the brow chakra is our third eye and the sixth chakra. The seventh chakra is our crown. For those of the listeners who don't know, can you describe what a chakra is and go through the other 5?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So there are, in my book, The Power of Chakras, there are 14 chakras that I talk about in that book. When my publisher asked me to write the book, The Power of Chakras, I immediately went back to the ancient scriptures of India to find the most authentic information I could find about the subject. Because chakras is not something that somebody, made up in a New Age class over a weekend. It's something that has been the ancient wisdom of India, known for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. So there are scriptures about the chakras, ancient Vedic and Tantric scriptures. And so I went to them. I went to the original scriptures. I found them, located them, and studied them. And what I found was that 14 chakras were described in those scriptures in great detail. So I passed on that information in my book, The Power of Chakras. And as a matter of fact, those people who write about chakras, who are well-known writers in the field, they use my book as reference book because it is so authentic and so based upon the ancient wisdom of India. So there are 7 major chakras that most people know about, starting with the base chakra, which is called Muladhara, and that is at the base of your spine. It is in the very, it's like in the area of the coccyx, the tailbone, spine. All of the major chakras are running along the middle of the spinal column, actually, is where they are lodged. And then they have other points as well in the front of the body that are connected to them called kshetram. So there's the chakras and there's the kshetram. Chakra itself means wheel. Literally, it's a Sanskrit word that means wheel. And it is not pronounced chakra. There's no such word as chakra in the Sanskrit language or in the English language. The word is chakra. Okay, so just think of when you're going to pronounce the word chakra, think of a Chuck E. Cheese. Okay, Chuck E. Cheese's pizza is round like a chakra, and it is Chuck E. Cheese chakra. Okay, so it's chakra.
Chakra.
Not chakra. Okay, I get so irritated when I hear somebody's pronouncing it wrong, and everybody pronounces it wrong. So
I would be too after 5 decades of studying this.
yeah.
But anyhow,
Yeah.
we have a little under 10 minutes before our break, and then after you
Yeah.
come back, I want to go into a lot more detail of the third eye. But I want to ask you one word that stuck out.
Could I go through the rest?
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
chakras
Let's
break,
finish them.
or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first chakra, Muladhara, is the base chakra, and that is associated with your organs of elimination. Actually, the kidneys, the intestines, and so on. The second chakra is called the sacral chakra, and that is associated with your gonads, associated with your reproductive organs. And that one is called Svadhisthana chakra. The third chakra is in your navel, the area of your navel, in that area of your spine where the navel is. In other words, go back to the spine on a horizontal level and you'll hit the chakra. So that one is called the Manipura chakra, and that one is the third chakra. It's called navel chakra. And okay, so the first chakra, Muladhara, actually means base or root. And the second chakra, Svadhisthana, means one's own self. It literally translates. Manipura, which is the third chakra at the navel, that literally translates as island of jewels, because it has so many, it's very bright. It's got a lot of vitality, a lot of pranic energies flowing through that third chakra, a lot of what I was talking about, the plexus of subtle energy. It's got a lot of those nadis that are intersecting. It's a huge plexus of energy. Then the fourth chakra is at the heart. That's called Anahata, which means unstruck sound. Strangely, that's the translation of that word, Anahata, and that's in the heart area. And then there's the throat chakra, which is the fifth chakra, which is in the area of your cervical area, and that one is called yeah, right. Okay, I can't remember the Sanskrit name.
It's okay. It's the fifth one, though. Yeah.
So that's the fifth one. The sixth one is, it's called Vishuddha chakra. And then the sixth one is called the Agya chakra. That's our third eye chakra in the middle of our forehead, and also in the middle of the head. And then the crown chakra at the top of the head, the 1,000-petal lotus, it's called. And that one is your Sahasrara. The Sahasrara means 1,000-fold or 1,000 petals. So those are the chakras.
There are colors associated with each chakra. Can you, do you know why each one was associated with a certain color? Did it have a certain meaning? Why one was red, one was green, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, so your listeners are going to get really mad at me now, because I'm going to tell you stuff that is not what you ordinarily think are the colors of the chakras. So, okay, hang on to your hats here, folks. And I don't know if I have time to do this right now before the break.
We can, don't worry.
But the 7 chakras that I just described have colors associated with them. But those colors, according to the ancient scriptures of India, those colors are not the same colors that you think they are, according to the New Age prevalent knowledge that's being proliferated throughout the New Age. So that's the way it is. But the reality is that each chakra is associated with a planet and a day of the week. And those planets and days of the week are associated with colors. And those colors are not the same colors that you think they are. So we can start with Sunday. Sunday is the day of the sun. That's why it's called Sunday. And that sun, that planet called the sun, is associated with the color red. And it's associated with the solar plexus, the sun plexus, which is at your navel. So that would be the color red at the navel. Okay, the next day is Monday, day of the moon, moon day. The moon day is in the area of of the sacral region, the reproductive organs, and that day of the moon, because it's associated with fertility. The moon has always been associated with fertility. And it's associated with the moon, and the color in that chakra is known as orange. And then there is the base chakra, which is Tuesday. Okay, so it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Now we're at Tuesday. And in French, they call that mardi. And if you know Spanish, it's a similar kind of name. It's Mars Day, the day of Mars. So Mars is associated with the base chakra, and it's associated with the day Tuesday. And the color associated with Mars is yellow. Okay, so then the next day is Wednesday. Wednesday is called mercredi in French, and similar name in Spanish, which I don't know how to pronounce. But Wednesday is the day of Mercury, mercredi, or Mercury Day. So that is associated with your crown chakra, your seventh chakra, associated with the planet Mercury. And it's associated with all these intricate connections that you find in the brain. And it's associated with the brain. So it's associated with all these neurons firing and everything. Mercury is the planet of communication. That's why it's associated with the crown chakra. The next day of the week is Thursday. That is also known as Jeudi in French, which means Jupiter Day. So Jupiter Day is associated with the third eye chakra, which is what we've been talking about, the third eye. And it is Thursday, and Jupiter is associated with the color blue. It's associated with the color, blue. That's right, blue. And the next day is Friday. Friday is Vendredi, the day of Venus. In French, they call it Vendredi. So that's the day of Venus, and the day of Venus is associated with the throat chakra. Why is that? Because the throat is the place where we are communicating, where we're expressing ourselves through creativity. Venus is associated with creativity, and that's Friday. And that color associated with Venus happens to be indigo. And then Saturday, the last day that we're going to talk about, is Saturn Day. That's why it's called Saturday. So Saturday is in the area of the heart chakra. And the color is violet. And Saturn is, the planet Saturn has also always been known as the planet of contraction and expansion. And that's what the heart does. It beats, contracts, expands, contracts, expands. So those are the chakras, and those are the, shall we say, esoteric colors that are associated with them, because those esoteric colors are associated with the planets that are ruling those chakras.
I had no idea, and that makes so much sense why there's 7, and I had no idea that they were based on each planet and the days. And with that being said, we are going to take a break. We have so much more to talk about. Everybody stay tuned. You're going to hear much more about the 6th chakra, and we're going to be speaking more about what can happen when you awaken your third eye. With Dr. Shumsky, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a couple short minutes.
This is Foster Gamble, and you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. And before we go on and continue this interview, just some quick announcements. We have had 12, that's right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 winners for Contact in the Desert, $400 tickets for 3-day passes, and we have many more to give. You have until May 15th, and of course, if you missed hearing your name announced on the show, you can always look in your email box, because not only will I notify you, they will be notifying you. All you have to do is go to contactinthedesert.com/Dr. J, contactinthedesert.com/DRJ. Now, I've heard some feedback from some of you that capital letters and lowercase actually do matter. So I guess if that's the case, then it's .com/capital J, lowercase r, capital J. Capital D, lowercase r, capital J, Dr. J. And of course, all these shows are logged and archived on YouTube via our YouTube channel, which is again under the same name, Dr. J Radio Live. As a matter of fact, that same name is for every social media account: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Flickr, Tumblr, even .com. So with that being said, go ahead and win a ticket. If you have a story to share, email me. You could find the contact page and so much more. And remember, we have several more tickets to win. And I could already tell, based on the ones that I've announced, a few of you are definitely people that have been listening to this show regularly, as I know your names as you call in, and of course, matching it up with what's being shown. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Susan Shumsky to get some more information on where we could find each of her 11 books, as well as websites and all the other information. Dr. Shumsky, where can people find you?
Thank you, Dr. J. And I have a website called drsusan.org, drsusan.org. That is where you can read the first chapter of all my books. You can listen to interviews, read articles. You can see videos. There's a lot going on that website. You can also order downloadable products and physical products, such as the books, the CDs, DVDs, and downloadable packages and physical packages. So there's a lot there. So I recommend that you subscribe there. And also right now there is a promotion going on. If you go to awakenyourthirdeye.com, and if you purchase the book from Amazon during this promotion, which is happening today only, that you can get thousands of dollars of free gifts from famous authors just by purchasing the book today from Amazon. That's awakenyourthirdeye.com. In addition, I have another website. It's called divinetravels.com. That's DIVINETRAVELS.com. And that one tells you all about the amazing tours to sacred destinations that I produce. Also cruise ship seminars, conferences, retreats, and so on. However, anytime you go to that website, there's only a few things on it. So what you need to do is subscribe there at divinetravels.com, because then you'll be notified of things going on in the future. And some of the interesting things coming up are, for example, cruise to Alaska, huge cruise that we're doing with a shamanic theme that's totally amazing with these incredible speakers. And I have a couple of trips to Peru coming up, the shamanic tours to Peru with this fantastic shaman named Malku, who is the one who found all the sacred sites of Peru and their true meanings. He was the one that actually discovered it and wrote all the books about it that the other guides used to tell their clients about. But he's the one that actually came up with all of it. So he's our guide that we use on our Peru trips. And also there's some other cruises coming up, one going to the Maya lands, end of October, and I have an incredible cruise coming up in January called the Conspira Sea Cruise. That's Conspira, and then SEA Cruise, Conspiracy Cruise, and another one next year. I mean, there's just a lot that's coming up, but they won't all be on the website yet. You have to subscribe, and then you'll be notified.
Aside from that cruise that you mentioned in January, I saw you a few weeks ago at the Alchemy event. Are you speaking anywhere in the next few months that we could tell the listeners about?
Well, the next place I'll be speaking actually is in the Alaska cruise, which is taking place in June. So
it's right around the corner, and that it would be a perfect time of the year to be there too. I've had family that's been there in that time. Before we went to break, we were talking about the chakras, and most importantly, I had no idea why the names came about, and of course the days of the week, and that just makes so much sense now. And of course, thank you for clarifying the color. Before we get off the topic of chakras, even though we're always going to be on it, considering we're focusing on the sixth chakra at this point, I wanted to ask you about the importance of having your chakras balanced versus having one more active than the other. Can you talk a little bit about balancing of the chakras or awakening them? Or I've just heard some people talk about that, when they assess people through aura imaging, that their chakras are imbalanced. Do you know if there's any credence to that?
Well, I don't know if people are going to want to hear this. There's a lot of myths about chakras. And one of them is about balancing chakras. I mean, there's nothing in India, in Ayurvedic medicine, in Chinese medicine, there's nothing about balancing chakras. Chakras are either healthy and awake and working properly, or they're muddied and messed up and not working properly. And there's many things that can happen that will cause the chakras to get clogged. A lot of that has to do with negative emotions. If you're holding negative emotions in these areas of your body, then that muddies things up, and it can also even cause physical illness. And there are, in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I talk about the 3 granthis, which are the 3 main places that these energies get blocked. The first granthi is in the area of the first and second chakra, which is has to do with survival instincts, and it has to do with being overly concerned and attached to the physical plane, and the need for survival being foremost in your mind. And the second granthi that's a problem is in the area of the heart and the navel area. And that one has to do with trying to gain physical power, shall we say, lording over other people, trying to gain attention and prestige and that kind of thing. And also, with reference to the heart, it has to do with being overly sentimental, maudlin, being nostalgic, those kinds of things where you're overly emotional in the area of the heart, rather than what would be healthy would be true love, would be divine love, in fact, devotion and true love. And then the third granthi, or the third psychic block, granthi literally translates as a psychic block. The third one is in the area of the third eye, which is kind of interesting because we're talking about the third eye today. And that block has to do with feeling power, getting power, and lording over people because you think you're so enlightened, or you think you're so psychic, or manipulating other people through your psychic powers and prowess and that sort of thing. So those are the 3 blocks that need to be overcome before you can raise the Kundalini energy, which is, Kundalini is a specific kind of pranic energy that flows through the middle of your spine. And when it flows all the way to the top of the head, you gain great spiritual powers and you become spiritually awakened and enlightened. And in order for Kundalini to rise through all of your chakras, you have to overcome those blocks that I mentioned. So the main problems with the chakras, rather than out of balance or whatever you might want to call it, is that really there are blockages in the chakras that need to be overcome, and the chakras need to be opened. When the chakras are opened and they're clear and they're pure, then we're healthy on every level. We're healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and also materially. We're healthy on every level if we have clear and clean, subtle energy flowing through our subtle body. And the energy places, the plexuses of subtle energy are the chakras. So they need to be clean, pure, and awakened.
I'm glad you mentioned the clarified the balancing thing, because there are a lot of myths out there, and clearly you've studied with probably the most foremost experts these days. As you mentioned, your mentor, I forgive me if I'm pronounced his last name. I just know him as Maharishi. Is it Mahesh Yogi? Is that the proper pronunciation of his name?
That's right, Dr. J.
Okay.
That's correct. It's Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Well, the fact
his name.
The fact that you studied underneath him, who happened to be, the guru of the Beatles and also Deepak Chopra, I think puts you as more of an authority than these other people who are just getting into this and sort of uninformed. So anything that comes across that needs to be corrected, by all means, this is the time and place to do it. And I'm glad you've set the record straight on a few of these topics. One word that stuck out to me that we haven't gotten to yet, and I don't know if it's relating to what we've gone to or we're about to get to, is about trepanation. Can you tell us what that word is? And how it relates to our third eye?
Say again?
Trepanation.
Trepanation.
Yes.
Okay, there was a book that was published. It was published in the 70s, I believe, and it was called The Third Eye, and it was published by this guy who. Let me see if I can find him in my here. All right, so it was published in 1956, actually.
Wow, almost 50
and
years.
Became a bestseller at the time. The author, his name was Cyril Henry Hoskin. He was a British plumber, and he claimed that his body was occupied by the spirit of a Tibetan monk, and the name of that monk was Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. So in that book, there's like a stunning kind of description of trepanation. Trepanation has been found all over the world. What it means is boring a hole in your skull. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the word trepanation comes from the Greek, which means to bore or to drill, drilling a hole in your skull. So it's like the classic hole in your head, but it's real, it's really having a hole in your head. So there have been a lot of skulls that have been recovered from all over the world with these kind of operations and surgery done by ancient cultures where but we don't know exactly why they were doing it. If they were trying to relieve pressure in the brain, or if they were doing it for some spiritual reason. But this rite of trepanation for opening the third eye is something that became popularized through this book that I'm talking about this so-called Tibetan monk who took over the body of the British plumber. So it said in that book that on this child's 8th birthday, where he was in the monastery, Tibetan monastery, and on his birthday he supposedly went through this surgery where his head was braced between the knees of this lama, and a shining steel instrument was bored into his head and pierced a hole in his head. And all the gory details are in this book. And then suddenly he saw a blinding flash and an intense pain, obviously. And then and then after the surgery, he was held in a small room and near darkness, and supposedly it helped him awaken his third eye, that he was able to have clairvoyant sight and he could see auras from that time onward. And it's some people still do this even today. There's a guy named Bart Hughes of the Netherlands, and he claims that this procedure has increased the blood flow in his brain and it expands his brain size, just like, you know, when a baby is born, they have a kind of a hole in their head at the top of their skull, soft spots that allow the brain to grow. So the people who are proponents of trepanation believe that the brain is going to have more room to breathe, shall we say. It's a very strange thing. I don't recommend anybody try this.
Because obviously I know there are better ways, and here comes the million-dollar question, and the reason why I read your book and brought you on this interview is going back to the third eye. What are the advantages of awakening our third eye?
Well, there's a lot of advantages, Dr. J. The fact is that the third eye is the eye of illumination, literally. So what it is, it's a way for us to gain greater spiritual enlightenment. It's a way for us to become more of who we really are. It's a way for us to develop our supersensory abilities, or subtle sensory powers, whatever you want to call them. These are abilities that ordinary humans don't have, but that we are capable of having if we develop them through opening the third eye. And there are great advantages to having your subtle sensory perception open. It means that you're able to make decisions, for example, with peaceful confidence, because you can communicate with divine beings that are much smarter than our egos are. And some of those divine beings happen to be your own higher self, your own what we call Atman, or higher self. They call it Atman in India. And that is the part of yourself that's really smart and has a wide-angle perception, wide-angle vision that can see things beyond what our ego is seeing. So if we ask questions of our higher self or of divine beings who we can communicate with, we can get answers that will help us in our everyday life in a very practical way to solve everyday problems, to receive divine love, healing, wisdom, inspiration, help us to spiritually evolve, help us to become higher level of awareness, higher beings. You know, all of this is possible, and the third eye is the key to all of it. So I believe that focusing attention on the third eye and using some of the techniques in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, to do that is a very worthwhile endeavor. In my book, I have tons of methods to help you awaken your third eye. I have yoga practices. Yoga, well, all right, people think yoga means an exercise on a mat. Well, that isn't what it means at all. The word yoga is from the Sanskrit. It means to yoke or to bind. In fact, it means the same thing as the word religion. Religion also comes from a root that means to yoke or to bind. So yoga means to yoke the individual spirit with universal spirit. It doesn't mean to yoke your nose with your knee or your forehead with the floor. That's not what it means. It means yoking our false self or ego self with the universal self. It means to attain spiritual awakening. So in the book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I have many practices, yoga practices, ancient practices, such as yoga asana, which means posture, pranayama, which means breathing, yoga breathing. Also bandhas. Bandha means muscular lock. Very powerful methods for awakening the Kundalini energy and for opening your third eye. And also what we call mudra, which means gestures for awakening, opening your third eye. And in addition to that, meditation practices that I teach in the book. For example, Trataka meditation is very powerful for awakening clairvoyant sight and also for increasing your ability to concentrate and to be focused and to be one-pointed in your intention. So it helps you with manifestation as well. So Trataka meditation is a gazing with soft focus at something, for example, a candle or the picture of a saint or the horizon or the star or the sky. There's different things to gaze at that I teach in the book, Awaken Your Third Eye. And also, this type of meditation can be practiced as mirror gazing, where you sit in front of a mirror and you use soft focus vision again to stare at your forehead or part of your, or above your head or your curve of your neck or something like that, your own, to stare at yourself. And you do that in a semi-darkened room. That's a powerful practice. And so this Trataka meditation is really a great thing to practice, and it can help you. Now, what do I mean by soft focus vision? I mean, if you've ever seen one of these books called Magic Eye book.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if you get a Magic Eye book, you'll see these colors and shapes on a page that seemingly meaningless. You know, there's just a bunch of colors and shapes. But if you stare with soft focus vision at one of these, then this third eye, this third dimension kind of image will suddenly emerge from the picture. You'll see a third eye image pop out of the picture suddenly. It'll be like there's a lot of different images they use, an airplane, a heart, a tree, whatever it is, you'll see unicorns or whatever. You'll just see them popping out of the page. And it means you're successful in using soft focus vision. So what is soft focus vision exactly? Well, we have two eyes. When they converge into a point, we're seeing clearly. We're not seeing two images. We're only seeing one image. When we don't focus our eyes, we'll actually see two images. The eye with the left eye will see one thing, and the right eye will see another thing. When you're looking at the Magic Eye pictures, if you use the soft focus vision properly, you're actually seeing separately through each one of your eyes. And that is what we call soft focus vision. And that's the way to successfully be able to see the 3D image that's popping out of the page. So developing that ability to have soft focus vision is the first step towards developing outer clairvoyant sight. But there's many other types of, shall we say, vision that we could develop through awakening the third eye. It's not just visual, it's also auditory and kinesthetic. So clairvoyance would be vision, the subtle vision. Audience would be the subtle hearing, such as hearing the divine voice speaking to you with words. And the third way would be clairsentience, which is clear feeling, and that would be getting a gut feeling about things. So all of these things are equally valid, seeing, hearing, and feeling. And most people are more clairsentient. For example, Dr. J, if people go into a room or they'll immediately feel or sense a vibration. For example, into a bar or a prison or a mental hospital, you're going to feel a very strong density in the atmosphere, a very negative vibration. If you walk into somebody's home that is a really bad vibe, maybe somebody's been taking drugs or people have been arguing, you're going to sense this really bad vibe there. Whereas if you walk into a beautiful place, like you go to the Lake Shrine of Yogananda in Pacific Palisades, or you go to another sacred place, the Great Pyramid of Giza, just there's many sacred places you could walk into that have an incredibly beautiful vibe. Or you walk into somebody's home that's loving, you feel the loving energy in that home. Or, for example, you meet somebody for the first time and you can sense whether that person is angry, uptight, sad, depressed. Maybe that person seems to be very cynical. Whatever it is, you can sense that about a person as soon as you meet them. Everybody has clairsentient abilities. the ability to sense things through the subtle sense of feeling.
You mentioned gut feeling and, of course, intuition. How can we tell whether it's our intuition is real or it's just a feeling because of, say, a traumatic memory or something along the lines of that?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you asked that question, Dr. J, because I talk about that in two of my books. One is called Divine Revelation, that book, and then the other book's called How to Hear the Voice of God. Now, what I teach in those two books is something called the 10 Tests of Spiritual Discernment. It would take me 3 hours to teach that. I don't have 3 hours to teach that on the radio show today. However, I do recommend that you read the books and you learn how to distinguish and discern between that true voice of spirit and other voices in your mind. And the reason why that's important is as follows. There are 4 different places that you might be getting your messages from: the spiritual world, the mental world, the astral world, or the environmental world. Those are the 4 different places. So you could be tapping into one of these realms and inadvertently think that you're communicating with a divine being when you are not. In the spiritual world, that's where I recommend that you do get your messages from. On that realm, you're going to be communicating directly with your higher self, with divine beings, with angels, archangels, deities, ascended masters, with your loved ones who have gone into the light after death and who are dwelling in the light. You can communicate with all these divine beings when you're in contact with that realm. However, these other realms do exist, and people who have wishful thinking, for example, or who are brainwashed and are not able to tap into the spiritual realm, they might be deluding themselves into thinking that they're receiving clear intuition or clear messages from the spiritual world, but in fact they're just kidding themselves. They're deluded. And also the astral plane, that's another place. It's a very dangerous place to be tapping into because you're talking with, for example, you're talking with earthbound spirits who have not gone into the light after death, who are stuck or stranded there, who are lost and confused, or you might be talking with faker spirits who are very clever and manipulative, who are pretending to be something they're not, who are taking on for example, maybe a biblical sounding name or another type of name that makes them sound as if they're really high and spiritual and all that. And then you're being completely faked out by those spirits who want to control you or who want to become famous through you or whatever. So that's the dangerous place. And there's also mischievous beings on that level. And there are demonic or really, really angry, negative beings who are malicious. So there's all kinds of beings in the astral plane that you do not want to communicate with. And then another place you might be getting your messages from is the environmental plane. And on that plane, you are in contact with the general flotsam and jetsam ideas of humanity that are floating around, which are just basic brainwashing type of thought forms that, you know, the vast majority of people on the earth believe, which are totally erroneous. You know, the belief that, for example, men are better than women or men should dominate women. I mean, there's a lot of so many ideas that are not true and that are in that environmental thought bank, shall we say. So it's best to get your messages only from the spiritual world, because otherwise it's just like opening your door to a stranger and letting anything and everything talk to you. So that's the reason I've developed the 10 tests of spiritual discernment that I teach in my 2 books, Divine Revelation and How to Hear the Voice of God.
Have you seen that movie, Lucy? Have you
I
heard
did.
It's a known fact. We use such a small percentage of our brain. Do you think that if we were able to use the fullest potential, we'd be able to communicate, as you mentioned, with other beings, and then eventually get to the point of controlling our own body, such as metabolism? Maybe not going as far as Lucy did in the movie, but do you think we can have some of those capabilities beyond what we spoke about, such as healing ourselves, telepathy, telekinesis?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
You got cut out a little bit. There you are.
Yes, all of that is possible, Dr. J. And in fact, the yogis have proved it because they've done it.
I've actually seen an amazing.
Actually,
there you
all
go.
of that is true, Dr. J. And the yogis have done it, and they have proved it. So yes, the answer is yes. That definitely is possible for any living human to develop that, and many yogis have demonstrated these kinds of powers that you're talking about.
I actually saw a few photographs. I had a friend, you might know him, Preston Dennett. He's a MUFON researcher, author of 16 books, and one of them was about human levitation. And he's showing books from people in India and Tibet that are literally levitating. Some of them in a position, cross-legged position. And it just blows my mind because these are 50, 80, 100-year-old images that may not have been tampered with. And they, of course, these are people that are very in touch with their spiritual self. And being that they're all from that region, I would think that they would probably fall under this category. Nonetheless, one thing associated with the third eye that I hear a lot about is DMT. Can you talk about what it is and what it has to do with the third eye?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will. But before I do that, I just want to comment on the levitation thing.
Yeah.
When I was in the ashram with my guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he taught us how to levitate, and we did. So, yeah, it's something that anybody can do and is possible to do. In my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I give the key to that, as a matter of fact. I have a chapter in this book, Awaken Your Third Eye, that gives the key to the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras are the aphorisms which teach people the supernormal powers, these special powers that are taught in the Yoga Sutras. And you can read the Yoga Sutras, but you won't know what to do with them unless you read this chapter of my book in Awaken Your Third Eye, where I actually give the key to how to use the Yoga Sutras and how to develop these supernormal powers, such as levitation, invisibility, and other powers.
Well, let's go a little in depth into the Yoga Sutras. Can you explain more detail of what they are and how they relate?
So the Yoga Sutras. So yes, the Yoga Sutras are written by a gentleman called Patanjali. And Patanjali is an ancient sage of India. And he wrote these, they're aphorisms of divine union. Divine union means yoga, or integration is another way you could say it. So what he teaches is how to attain that through a specific practice that he teaches called sanyama. And sanyama has different aspects to it. And by doing this practice, you gain greater spiritual awakening. So the purpose of it is to attain what he calls kaivalya, which means, I guess you could sort of translate that as a witness, being able to be rather than to do, shall we say, to be in a state of being or witnessing. So he teaches you how to do this through this practice called sanyama. And he also talks about 8 limbs of yoga, which I explain. I explain all of that in this chapter in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye. So it's really powerful, and it works. And I was taught this by my guru. He taught thousands of people how to practice this. And it really works.
I got a question for you from a listener here, from Lou Sheehan. What does Dr. Shumsky mean when she refers to the law of attraction, and how does it work?
Okay. The law of attraction. Well, that's off topic, but that's fine. I'm more than happy to talk about that. The law of attraction is really basically the same. I'll tie it in with the third eye in this way. The law of attraction is the same as the law of karma. Karma, the word karma means action. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything other than action. Now, the Lord Buddha said in the very first verse of the first chapter of the Dhammapada, which is the most important scripture of the Buddhists, or of Buddhism. He says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. This is a stunning statement, so I'm going to just pause and say it again. He says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought.
So
he goes on to,
essentially you're saying our mind, our thoughts is what manifests into reality?
Exactly. That's what he's saying. And he goes on in that same verse, he goes on to say, if a person speaks or acts with a pure thought, then happiness follows him or her. If a person speaks or acts with an impure thought, then unhappiness follows him or her. So what he is saying, to summarize what he says in this verse, he's saying that we're creating our own destiny through our thoughts, primarily through our thoughts, also through our words and through our deeds. Because he says speaks or acts as well, okay? So we're creating our destiny moment by moment through every thought, every word, and every deed. And that is a law. That is the law of attraction. It's the law of karma. It's a law that states, it is done unto you as you believe. Okay? It is done unto you as you believe. That's what Jesus said. So what does that mean? What belief are we talking about? Are we talking about our conscious belief or our subconscious belief? What do you think, Dr. J?
I would have to think our subconscious.
You're right. Because it is our deepest convictions, which are in many cases subconscious. Our deepest convictions is what manifests on the physical plane. So the law of attraction states that it is done unto you as you believe. The law of attraction states that when we throw a pebble into a pond, the ripples go out from that pebble to the edge of the pond, and then the ripples come back just as they went out. Similarly, every thought, every word, every deed that you do goes out into the universe. It doesn't stop at the edge of your physical body. It doesn't stop at the edge of your energy field. In fact, it goes all the way out throughout the universe. It's like the Maharishi effect we were talking about before. There is an effect of everything that you do, everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do. And that effect will come back to you, just as it was sent out. So the law of attraction says that as you sow, so shall you reap. In other words, it's going to come back to you just as it was sent out. So if we're thinking, saying, and doing positive, powerful things, then we're going to have a powerful, positive life. If we are agitated, angry, depressed, whatever it is, if we are negative, then we'll have negative results in our life. It's just the way it is. It's the law of attraction. We're attracting to ourselves exactly the same thing that we put into the universe. It's the whole idea of like attracts like. So that's what the law of attraction is, and we can utilize that by consciously creating powerful, positive words and deeds. And hopefully thoughts. It's not that easy to control your thoughts, by the way, but it is easy to control your words and your deeds. So Jesus also said another cool thing. He said it's not so important what goes into your mouth as what comes out of your mouth. So what we're saying is what's creating our destiny. And so if we keep on saying over and over, oh, I'm so poor, I'm so sad, I'm so depressed, I'm so angry, I'm so this and that, negative thoughts, well, what negative words, what's going to manifest in your life? Exactly what you have continued to affirm over and over and over, particularly when you use the very powerful, mighty words, I am. You're invoking the mighty I am presence when you do that. So you're attracting to yourself what you have put out into the universe through using those words. If you go around saying, I am happy, I am joyous, I am prosperous, I am healthy, I am fulfilled, I am at peace. If you're saying positive thoughts and emotions, expressing those through your words, then you're going to attract that. It's just very simple. The law of attraction is very simple.
You made a very fascinating statement, which is so true, that it's very difficult to control our thoughts. Now, consciously, we can say things like, I am powerful, I am smart, I am intelligent, I am good, and we could do good deeds. But before we go back to the third eye, what can we do to quiet the negative subconscious thoughts?
It's not easy. It's really not easy. I mean, people might tell you, oh, I have the system. I have the way to help you eliminate your negative thoughts. Well, it's really not that easy. But by diligent practice of speaking positive statements, such as I teach in my books, these are the books that are related to this question, by the way, and these answers that I'm giving right now. My book, Miracle Prayer, and my book, Instant Healing. Those are the books, if you want to really change your negative thoughts and emotions, to use powerful positive statements called affirmations or affirmative prayer. That will go a long way to help you to change your negative thoughts and emotions. If you continually use these types of positive statements, well, continually, that's a strong word. If you often use affirmative prayers and positive statements, then that's going to change your consciousness. Now, the other thing that changes it even more, though, is meditation. Because meditation actually will help you go into a higher state of consciousness. And in a higher state of consciousness, you're not going to have negative thoughts and emotions. When your consciousness is connected to the spiritual world, it's impossible to have a negative thought in that state. So if you can develop your consciousness through meditation, then you're really changing your thoughts and emotions in a permanent way. So that's why I'm a big advocate of meditation.
I didn't know that. That is a fascinating answer. And everybody out there listening, that is a way that you can change your life for the better. Now, I want to spend the rest of the time, because we've got a little under 15 minutes left, on awakening the third eye. One thing that we got sidetracked on was DMT. I hear that a lot.
Exactly. Right. Okay, DMT is dimethyltryptamine. It is a substance. It's a chemical. And in the 1960s, it was very popular. You know, I was a hippie in the 1960s, so I know about all these psychedelic drugs and everything. So DMT was always known to have a very quick acting and powerful effect. I mean, really quick acting, and a quick kind of trip. We used to call them trips. So you go into this psychedelic state very quickly, and it's over quickly. That's what DMT was always known for. It's an illegal drug that I do not recommend anybody try. However, these days, the drug has become very popular as a kind of a tourist attraction. In South America, the Aguaro Indians have been using, I believe that's the name of the Indians. Anyway, these Indians in South America and the Amazon have been using something called ayahuasca, which is a plant medicine. And that plant medicine is mostly made of the chemical DMT. And people are going to South America to have visions and to experience altered states of consciousness through taking this drug, ayahuasca. It's a shamanic medicine, a plant medicine, and it has been used since 500 BC by they're called Aguaruna Indians of the Amazon. So DMT can often help people to have a greater understanding of their self or communion with a higher power, and so on and so on. Now, the stunning thing about this, Dr. J, is that in 2013, this is very recent research has been done. By the way, my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, has tons of scientific research in it. And one of the most stunning discoveries that was made was in 2013, where Rick Strassman, he's a pretty well-known guy. He wrote the book, The Spirit Molecule, where he talks about DMT and so on. So he's from the Cottonwood Research Foundation, and him and his research partners made a stunning discovery. They found that in rodents, rats, in other words, which are our cousins, they are mammals, that in their pituitary gland, they are producing the psychedelic hallucinogen DMT. So they were able to find that, in fact, the pineal gland is a source of DMT, that it is manufactured there. So that's a really stunning discovery. And the reason why it's stunning is because it gives credence to the whole idea of the third eye being the center of higher consciousness and the center where people can tap into otherworldly experiences and to have experiences of realms that are hidden from view. So I think it's an amazing discovery.
I think that's fascinating. For 2,500 years, people have been using it as a psychedelic drug, and yet we are able to produce it ourselves naturally. I think, obviously, right there is a huge link, and those who are taking it to reach that higher state of consciousness, I'm sure, gave them the ability to expand their wisdom, and I'm sure at some point they probably realized that they could do it without the use of the drug. Have you ever had a chance to meet any of those Indians or the locals that use the ayahuasca drug?
Well, actually, my shaman Malku, I'm sure, has done it, but I'm not. I don't advocate taking drugs, so I don't go in those circles because I was a hippie. It was the '60s. We all did it, but once you have learned how to meditate without drugs and how you can do this all naturally, it's not really necessary to take the drugs, and the drugs will actually damage your brain. So I really don't recommend that anybody take drugs because they will damage your brain and they will cause you to have less of an ability to have clear thinking. It's not good. I
absolutely agree. I think we could do things naturally, and of course, with the clear head, we could accomplish so much more. And,
right.
and not to mention, as you said, it damages our brain permanently. Some people think it's just temporary. Permanently. You already touched on this question, but I'm going to sort of...
I know, from first-hand experience.
I'm going to sort of expand on it. I know that every single person on Earth is capable of awakening their third eye. The question I have for you is it more difficult for others? I mean, children, as we mentioned earlier, are less polluted. So I would imagine if they knew what to do, they could unlock it easier. But for, say, an average 35-year-old male anywhere across the world, would it be more or less difficult than their counterpart in another country, for instance?
Well, that's an interesting thought. I think it depends on the purity of the atmosphere that a person is raised in. If a person has a more natural environment that they're raised in, if they are free from GMO foods, if they're free from fluoridation, if they're free from pollutants in the atmosphere and the air and the water and things that we're ingesting, that they have a better chance of naturally developing these completely natural endogenous powers that we already have. So I think that a lot of it depends upon that, and it also depends upon the kind of environment that they're in, as far as the kind of parents maybe that they have, the kind of beliefs that they're raised in as well. Definitely will influence them.
Interesting. Now, I don't know if hopefully we have enough time to touch on these, but I wanted to ask you about the microcosmic orbit and how that's related to our third eye.
Oh, great. So the microcosmic orbit is from Taoist philosophy, and I have a chapter on that in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye. The microcosmic orbit is a practice that's done in Taoism that will help you to conserve your, what they call Jing in China. And what is that? Okay, well, it's actually your fluids, your sexual fluids is what it is. In China and in India, they believe that you're only given a certain amount of this power, this particular power, when you're born, and that when that power runs out, you're dead. So what is that power? Well, it is the power that's in your sexual fluids. And if you dissipate that through too much ejaculation, for example, supposedly it shortens your life. This is what in China, I mean, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe the same thing, but this is what they believe in China and in India. So if you can figure out a way to turn that energy back into the body to nourish the body rather than dissipating it, then you'll supposedly have more longevity, you'll live longer, and you will have a happier, healthier life. So that's the theory. And there is a kind of a, it's even more than that. They actually even believe that you can become immortal if you know how to use these energies properly. So in my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I do teach you something called the microcosmic orbit, which helps you to, it's just a kind of a visualization technique to help you to use that energy to feed it back into your subtle body and become more spiritually awakened and to have greater robust health and well-being. So that's what it is. It's a circuit. It's a circuit of energy that you visualize. It starts at, well, let's see, it starts, it just goes around in a circle. I don't know how to explain it. There's a diagram here in the book I'm looking at. I wish I could describe the diagram. You go through these various points in the body, and you imagine these different points in the body going down your spine, down to the perineum, and then back up to perineum, or however you pronounce that, going back up to the front of the body and to the top of the head. So it's like a circle. It's a circle that you're visualizing in the body. And I teach you how to do that in this book. It works.
Dr. Shumsky, we're almost out of time. We have just under 2 minutes. We also do have a listener question, so I'm hoping I could tie this in with asking you a final question. The listener question is, how do we decalcify our pineal gland? And then my final question to you would be, what is the ultimate purpose of the third eye?
Mm-hmm. Okay. In my book, Awaken Your Third Eye, I actually have an entire list of things that you can do to decalcify your third eye. Some of them have to do with diet, water, taking certain supplements, strangely enough, using boron, either in form of homeopathic boron or a tiny bit of borax, tiny bits. Iodine, avoiding fluoride in the toothpaste, practicing certain yoga exercises, using an eye mask at night when you sleep so you get enough melatonin production, sun gazing, using specific essential oils, meditation, and affirmation. So all of that is discussed in the book, Awaken Your Third Eye. Now, the ultimate purpose of the third eye is to attain spiritual enlightenment. What do I mean by that? Well, the definition of spiritual enlightenment would be to no longer be bound by the material world, to no longer be bound by the continual cycles that most people go through, that average individuals go through, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. They call it the wheel of birth and death. So if you can no longer be subject to that wheel and no longer need to reincarnate again and again and again, if you have a choice in the matter, in other words, you can get, shall we say, jump off the wheel of birth and death, or shall we say, end the cycle of birth and death. If you can do that, then you have attained true spiritual enlightenment. And people can do that. The third eye is the key to spiritual enlightenment. It's the key to spiritual awakening.
And with that being said, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show with Dr. Susan Shumsky. Be sure and check out her fascinating new book, Awaken, Your Third Eye, along with the other 10 titles, 2 of which I own, Power of Chakras, as well as The Power of Auras. So much more fascinating material you could see on our websites, which will be posted. Again, go to drjradiolive.com to see upcoming guests. Remember, disclosure is in your hands. Responsibility of your life is in your hands. And with that being said, this is Dr. J signing out.